Well, I thought I'd do kind of a casual teaching video on oak wilt. I get a lot of questions regarding oak wilt. I've worked with it for over 30 years. And there's a lot of misconceptions out in the marketplace as to, what it is. And currently it's freshly arrived in Ontario. And a lot of the governmental authorities are really, cracking down on it hard, and they have specific protocols, and it's honestly, it's a little bit of an overkill. I think they're shooting themselves in the foot, demanding to be involved in every aspect of it. But I can see the precautions because you're coming into an area where, the vast majority of the professionals aren't aware of what's going on. But you need to just educate people on this. And so I thought, coming from an area where we've had it for decades, I can probably provide some simple protocols that can help out greatly. Early detection is obviously paramount. When I get called for oak wilt, I absolutely love it when there's like one tree wilting and it's just begun the process of wilting. So that would mean I was called in early July. And it's like, oh, my tree started dropping leaves. That is a very observant homeowner that would call in that scenario. It's like, usually it's like, I think this tree was alive last year, but I can't quite remember, and it's like 3 years dead, and there's multiple other trees dying. That's generally the case. But it's great if you can get in there and you're on the first tree. In that scenario, you can rescue the whole yard. And I don't know if you're in an area where you have pure stands of red oak. I'm in such an area where we have, multiple red oaks in one area. And so somebody's losing one and they've got a potential to lose 10 mature trees out of their yard. It's just devastating. And where it really hit many years ago and became well known is in Minnesota, Anoka County, which is almost a pure stand of northern red oak. And these massive trees around in neighborhoods and just dying. And, the construction activity and everything else, building houses in the spring. And in the spring is when it travels overland most readily. And so April, May, and June are when it is most readily transplanted over land. April, May, and June. So obviously not pruning or injuring oak trees in April, May, and June. And you can understand that the construction industry kicks off when? In April in the north, And so everybody's gung-ho to, and so instead of clearing the lot in the winter, they wait till spring and they cut down these trees and move trees and they expose roots and everything else. And so things are getting exposed at the exact time when they shouldn't be. And so early detection, prevention, not pruning in April, May, or June. And, if you read a lot of the Wisconsin literature, and maybe Dr. Jennifer Juswick out of University of Minnesota, she took over Dr. French's studies of oak wilt. And that is what I consider one of the leading authorities, University of Minnesota, Dr. David French, Dr. Jennifer Juswick. Look up materials by them. And then Wisconsin. The Wisconsin DNR has produced some great updated information. They have a great online tracking source for degree days, oak wilt protocols within that program. So definitely some good resources out there coming out of Minnesota and Wisconsin. So for the Ontario folks, reference, don't reinvent the wheel. Reference publications from areas that have dealt with it for decades. And so let's say you discover oak wilt. So you have this wilting tree. Now, intuition would tell you, cut that thing out of there, get rid of it, faster the better. No. A summertime removal of a wilting tree will spread it to the adjacent trees within that season. I mean, there's a likelihood that it will. And so you don't want to open up those straws. You know, you think of the vascular system of a tree as a series of straws. And, you know, if you're holding your finger on a straw and there's water in it, you know, and then you let your finger go and the water runs out. Okay, think of that as a tree, and it's grafted to the tree next to it. And that tree over there is living and vibrant. There's transpiration going on. It's got a suction, you know, a turgor pressure being pulled up the tree. It's a suction. And so there's a little bit of resistance between trees. And if you open up all those straws at the stump, boom, it can move faster to that next tree. And it generally takes a season to get to that next level. It can take up to 4 seasons to get to the next level, depending on where the root grafts are and how extensive the grafting is. And so you don't want to remove that tree within the growing season that it's wilting. You want to, you know, if you want to do something right away, if there's trees within grafting distance, you want to treat those trees chemically. Now, it's still considered experimental, all right? And in Ontario, they're going to tell you there's no cure. And they're going to tell you don't chemically treat. And they're going to tell the consumers that there's no chemical treatment. And don't let any charlatans tell you that there is. It's like, that's real easy for that government official to, quote, protect the client from charlatans. But I'm telling you, there's one guarantee. If you have oak wilt in your yard and you do nothing, the next tree is going to die. Period. Guaranteed. It's going to die. Okay, so their caution to not treat is the very thing that will kill the next tree. Because that will take away one tool that could slow that spread. Now, trenching is the number one way to separate the root grafts and bring solid protection to the remaining trees. So if you're in a situation where you can trench, they have protocols of how much distance, depending on the diameter of the trees. Again, refer to the literature. My general rule as a practitioner is you want at least one live tree between your primary trench and the diseased tree. And if you have early detection and you're there at the first wilting tree, or you're there early in the season, and maybe you've had multiple years of death, but now you're there in July, and somebody's saying, yeah, we got this going on again. And for a couple years, we've lost some trees. And now it's wilting. I think it's moving right through the stand. You know, I mean, that's your typical call. And that you're arriving at an already established pocket where you've had multiple years of death. And so if you're early in the season, like early July, and you've got a wilting situation, to put in your trench, you want to be beyond the next live tree. I mean, generally there's a tree within close distance of the tree that's wilting. If that's still alive and non-symptomatic, if you trench beyond that, closer to the tree you want to protect, you're probably going to get a solid trench separation. And so that's a good protocol. Leave one live row of trees between your primary trench and the diseased tree. And then, you know, if the client has discretionary funds, put a wish line, okay, I call it a wish line, between the first live tree and the diseased tree. You're probably too close. You know, it could be beyond it already, but maybe not. What if? All you got to do is cut a trench. And we cut 4 feet down. We use a mini skid steer with a trencher. You got to put it straight down to get 4 feet. We have frost teeth on our trencher tool. And the frost teeth, they don't scoop the dirt out. There's no reason to scoop all the dirt out. You just have to cut a line. And so with the frost tips on the chain, you don't take as much dirt out of the hole. So when you look down in there, it doesn't look like it's 4 feet deep, but your bottom tooth was scraping at 4 feet. And now, 90% of the roots, can you have something lower? A lot of the recommendation in the literature will be 5 feet. All right, there's not a lot of oxygen below 48 inches. I mean, and you're talking about a graft, roots have to come in contact with each other. I have had very good success with 4 foot deep trenching with this little mini skid steer. And we can get into so many places with this little mini skid steer that it's just a very good service to provide. You can get, very good control, and you can confidently sell this as a viable service to your client and know that you're doing the best for them. And so that's what I recommend for some of these smaller companies. You got a mini skid steer already, buy a trencher attachment that has, a 48-inch reach, and put buy it with frost teeth, not the big scooper blades, and start selling trenching. And then any live tree, that is within the grafting distance of the dead tree, you want to either remove or treat chemically to help preserve that. If you want to go hardcore, you find a place to put your primary trench with one live tree in between that and the dead tree. And after you make that trench, you remove everything inside that trench. That's the hardcore sell. Now, people have a hard time taking down live trees. And I'm going to tell you that's going to be a hard sell. That's your best way to go about it. But, if they really want to preserve those, that's where we treat, is inside that trench area. We treat those live trees to try to keep them alive. And we'll treat them, the year we trench. Actually, we treat them first before we trench. So to give the exact protocol here, if we have trees we're going to treat, we'll plug them in and we'll treat them. Then we'll run our trench where we're going to run our trench. And then after the trench, you can remove the diseased tree, and you've treated the other ones. But generally, we leave the removal for the dormant season. That way there's no confusion. It's just like, don't remove oak wilt trees in the growing season. You're just potentially moving it to the next tree faster. And even where you've treated trees, I wouldn't want to move it closer there and give it disease pressure, even with the treatment in the tree. We have had trees that we've treated die, and sometimes they die of seemingly other causes. They don't wilt like they do, but they die back. They get an oak dieback syndrome of some kind. And it's a little bit of a mystery. But, maybe it's a phytotoxicity from the treatment. Bur oaks with bur oak blight, they will have a phytotoxic response to propiconazole. Red oaks, I have not seen a phytotoxic response in red oaks, unless some of this decline in future years is a little phytotoxicity going on. But I think it may have more to do with two-line chestnut borer and different things. And I've talked at length with rainbow tree scientific guys and ecoscience, rainbow ecoscience now it's called. But you got early detection, you've got established trench lines, chemically treat, then trench, then remove. Preferably remove only in dormant season months. And then the spore mats. Only I'll deal with some nuances here. Only red oaks produce spore mats. Okay, white oaks do not produce spore mats. Bur oaks do not produce spore mats. White oaks, often in the same area in a mixed forest, white oaks will not get the disease. I mean, it'll literally kill every red oak in the forest, and the white oaks will all remain. I mean, right there, in close proximity, and the white oaks never get it. Which shows the rarity of overland transmission, because the only way the white oaks could get it from the red oaks is by overland transmission. So white oaks don't get wounded very often in the forest. They just don't. They're pretty sturdy. They're flexible. Try to break off a little, 1-inch white oak branch that's alive. It doesn't break. And same with bur oak. And so these trees don't get wounded often in storms or anything like that. But red oaks are more brittle. And so that's why red oaks tend to get them during storms. Because storms often come during April, May, and June. And so you can get introduction that way. But as it is, only 5% of oak wilt is spread via overland transmission. So regarding treatment, every plant healthcare company loves renewals, right? Oh, if we can sell, a treatment every 2 years to protect against oak wilt, that'd be a great revenue stream. Well, sure it would be. I mean, that's what we have with emerald ash borer, right? Every 2 years, you got to inject your ash tree. It's great marketing. But with red oaks are highly prone to decay, and you're drilling into the base of the tree, and there's a negative result from that drilling into a wood that is prone to decay. And so to do that every 2 years ongoing, we've had situations where there's been serious disease pressure where we treated oaks, multiple years, 5 times over 10 years. And so I've seen personally the result of that. And you've got to start dodging holes, on where you drilled last time. With the treatment in regard to that, where do you drill the holes? You drill them as low in the root flare as you can. So the first time you're coming in to inject a tree, you want to excavate that. You want to go below grade, as low as you can get on that root flare. And that's where you're drilling your holes, about every 6 inches or so, give or take. Using the whole root flare, and you're putting in, 20, 30 T's into that root flare. And then the next year, you're going to go between those holes at the same level. So you're going to dig it out again in 2 years. And you're going to treat it again. And ordinarily, we only treat twice, and then we let it go. We leave it up to nature from there. So if you've got trees that were within a trenched area that you treated, we treated them once. 2 years later, we treated them again, and then we let them go. So they had 4 years of protection beyond the disease. And then we had them live. We've got trees that are alive today that we treated 10 years ago for the last time, and they're still alive within grafting distance of the original dead tree. So we've got examples where this worked. Okay, if the client would have listened to the DNR agent that said, there is no cure, that tree would be dead. Guaranteed. Guaranteed that tree would be dead. So just because you may not have success with a treatment doesn't mean the treatment is not a viable option to choose. because the alternative is a guaranteed death. And then, so you want to start as low as possible with drilling your holes, and then you work your way up. And if you've been able to separate and trench, then you're good with that 4-year protocol. You treat once, and then 2 years later you treat again. We always treat in early June in 2 years when that comes up. We try to treat in early June. If we're coming upon an oak wilt situation, and maybe somebody calls us, usually they're calling us when? In July, right? When they see the leaves falling. They're falling all over the yard. And so we're often doing the initial chemical injection in mid to late summer. We've injected as late as October 15th into a red oak. But then in 2 years, we'll inject in June. So we don't inject in October again. We injected in October because we were there in October. And that was the earliest we could inject, because that's when we were notified. But if we got a choice on the instead of going exactly 2 years later in October again, we would go in June, because oak wilt tends to display itself in July. So we don't want to wait. We don't want to play with that fate and wait till July. We don't know all the mechanisms involved with a July wilt. So if we've got a choice, we're going to inject in late May, early June, as soon as we have full leaf out. And what do we use? Alamo. The propiconazole is the active ingredient, but we use Alamo, the trade name, only. There was a period of time where we used some generic propiconazole, and all I can tell you is we saw the most mortality in those years. And there was a couple years, and so we had some data, and it just seemed like, gosh, why are we getting this decline? It's like, well, we did change from Alamo to a different propiconazole. So I really believe formulation matters, and Alamo, whether by hook or by crook, or luck or by grace, Alamo seems to be the best formulation. Viscosity-wise, whatever it is, just go with Alamo. So that's my promotion. And then, inject as early as you can after you've been notified, and then late May, early June in 2 years, roughly 2 years, whichever, comes first, 2 years or June, early June. And then, we've had very good success with that protocol. And anything else here? That seems to be it. I just hope this is a good, overall picking of my brain on general oak wilt protocol. White oaks do not graft with red oaks. White oaks do not graft with bur oaks. And white oaks and bur oaks do not readily graft with each other. So when, as far as therapeutically treating white oaks for oak wilt, if you come across a white oak and you test it and it tests positive for oak wilt, you can inject that and stop that disease. It's a one-time injection and it will cure it. I have a bur oak. I can drive by it to this day. Tested positive for oak wilt. It had wilting leaves. I injected that tree. That tree is still there. I injected it once with 20 mils per inch of diameter. So it's a higher rate. You can get some phytotoxicity with bur oak, especially. White oak I haven't injected a ton of white oaks because it doesn't get in there very often. And then you got to get a verified test to know that, oh, this does have oak wilt in it. We're going to inject it. Boom, we saved it. So no need to proactively protect your white oaks against oak wilt because it's not going to kill it fast. You're going to be able to test it and verify it, and you'll be able to inject it and cure it. So anytime you're dealing with oak wilt and white oaks or bur oaks, you can cure them with a single injection of propiconazole, Alamo version, at 20 mils per inch of diameter. And red oaks, symptomatic red oaks, my general recommendation is do not try to treat a symptomatic red oak. I've done it recently a couple of times. One was at the behest of the client. They just like, I'm willing to spend the money. So I injected it. And it was one that we had injected in years past. And somehow oak wilt got back in the area. And we injected it while it was actively wilting. And it's still there. We injected it again this year, 2 years later. So it's in its second protection cycle. And this is a situation where we're probably going to have to inject this every 2 years or it will wilt again. So we may be stuck just injecting this every 2 years to keep the tree alive, but it's alive. So I just injected one for my mother-in-law this summer. It doesn't look to be doing that well. My son just pruned it yesterday, and he said it looked pretty dead in one side of the canopy. Now there may be half the canopy might persist. We'll know in the spring. But it didn't die, right? It was wilting. It would have been defoliated in 3 weeks, and we got in there and injected it during the wilting process, and it halted the wilting process. So there is that. But if you do that, you just have to have full disclosure. Like this is absolutely experimental. There's no guarantee, but your tree might live. If you have the discretionary money, here it is. And so typically when we inject it, it takes about, an hour to 2 hours sometimes to inject an oak tree, depending on, for injection protocol, always make sure the tree is well watered. And it just has to be the day before. We had a situation where we were injecting for somebody and somebody's neighbor's tree was actually within distance. And they said, can you inject our tree? And so it was kind of spur of the moment. And we said, yes. And it was super dry, droughted. And we plugged the tree in and it wasn't doing a thing. Like when trees are in drought stress, they close the stomata on their leaves. There's nothing going on. And we turned on the hose and let it run in the root zone. That tree turned on like a light switch. It was amazing. and all of a sudden you just watch it start to go down in the, we had a translucent canister that we were pressurizing, and amazing. So, always make sure you have good soil moisture because it's a transpiration process that's pulling that into the tree. And what we want is high soil moisture, low relative humidity. So plan your injection day for a sunny, high pressure, low relative humidity in the air, and then make sure there's good soil moisture. And you can augment that soil moisture like the night before. So call your client, say, I'm coming, in 1 day, 2 days, whatever. Please water your tree right now, thoroughly in a large area of the root zone. So that tree is nice and hydrated, and you're going to get good uptake on a high pressure sunny day. A little bit of breeze is even better. So That's a couple of good hints there. What's another good hint? Sharp drill bits. Do not overuse your drill bits, and get the high helix. Buy your drill bits from Rainbow Ecoscience. I mean, that's what I recommend. You get the high helix. That means there's lots of they're a tighter spiral on the high helix, and it just makes a cleaner hole. And be generous on the depth. You're already drilling a hole. If you look at the old Shigo literature, a drill hole is responded to very efficiently by a tree. So there's not this huge decay issue. I've opened up trees years later. It's kind of compartmentalized pretty nicely. But you do want to be mindful of subsequent injections that you're not really close to the other drill hole. Obviously, you don't want to be directly above, because those pores on white red oaks are open and you'll have leakage through the old hole. So you want to go between the locations of your previous holes, and you'll see them there in subsequent years. I'm just trying to spill all the little knowledge that I have and get it in this video. And yeah, I know you have to look at my ugly mug the whole time, but I think this is going to be real practical advice for, all the people where oak wilt is just getting into out east, Pennsylvania and Ontario. It's starting to sneak in there. So I hope you enjoyed it. Game of Trees. We're having fun. Like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.